Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Welcome back to Ymedia Newsroom. We've been talking about the latest headlines when it comes to this US, Israel, and Iran war ceasefire, and what's happening with the latest developments, and what's happening in Washington, D.C. Essentially, the Democrats are shifting from a hesitation to an active preparation for the impeachment for the president. This is something that they're seeing a strong momentum towards. We know that this year is midterms year, so that's actually very, very critical for them. We're going to go into details on this, but right now we have a very, very special guest, not actually a special guest. It is the group editor of Ymedia, Ymedia Jaswal. He is joining us live from Ottawa, where he's been on Parliament Hill. Essentially, lots has been going on, and he's going to give us the latest of what is happening on Parliament Hill when it comes to Canada. Hello and welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, Monaji. Thank you so much. And there are lots of things that I'm going to discuss today. I'm here on behalf of Ymedia as group editor at the Parliament Hill in Ottawa. In the last couple of days, I've met many people. There was a big event in Toronto. I attended that earlier, where many of our media colleagues were there. Many of our media colleagues I've met here in Ottawa as well. I did meet approximately 300 to 400 people from the media fraternity in Canada in the last 2-3 days. And we've been discussing many issues, as you were mentioning earlier as well. These issues ranging from the politics which happens across country, across the globe, but sure, right here at the Parliament Hill where I'm reporting live right now. And also, other than the Canadian politics, we did discuss the geopolitical issues, especially given the circumstances. And I must tell you this, that Ymedia, our print newspaper midweek, is widely appreciated in the mainstream community as well. Many of them, they already knew about Ymedia. Many of them, they started picking up our newspaper. And from Globe and Mail to Toronto Star to Wall Street Journal, I did ask them, I really find a print copy of Wall Street Journal, and one of the senior persons here, he said, yeah, we have millions of our readers digitally connected with us. So let's see. I'm going to share more details with you, and whatever question you have to ask, please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great to have you in Ottawa. It looks like a nice sunny day, so that's good because Ottawa is usually colder than Toronto. So that's good. So tell us what you've been hearing from them. What are these conversations you're having with, media colleagues and, people that have gathered there? What's on the ground?
Yeah, I'll start with Toronto. In Toronto, mostly when I was there at the Ritz, there was a big event. Around 300 people from the media fraternity were there. And they were mainly talking geopolitics. Of course, they were talking about Canada's situation as well. But mainly, there was some sense of urgency in the media fraternity. Now I'm talking about Toronto first, then I'll talk about what I heard here in Canada. In Toronto, at the event at Ritz Toronto, most of my media colleagues, they were saying that, not much has happened in the last decade. Now we see a sense of urgency in terms of building the infrastructure. They are listening to the promises made by our Prime Minister, Mark Carney. But there was an announcement of the pipeline recently as well, the Enbridge pipeline, the $4 billion investment. But they're saying, yes, how many shovel-ready projects are there? How fast can we move the things? There has been discussion about a lot of infrastructure projects. There is discussion about how do we improve our trade ties. So in Toronto, these were the questions. And of course, there were discussion at the geopolitical level as well, which if you want, I can get later into those details as well. How many of our media colleagues in the mainstream are questioning how Trump is, the relationship with Canada. That's the main question. These are two questions. Here in Ottawa as well, same sense of urgency, similar discussions which I heard in Toronto, similar discussions here in Ottawa as well. And most of them are saying, whether they're from Globe and Mail. By the way, Global Mail's reporter Stephen Chase, he quickly came up to me and he said, introduce, and I said, yeah, I know you. He said, I was the one who broke the Hardeep Nijjar story. And I said, my colleague Shubhi, who's here with me right now. So he was with them in India as well. And he says, I want to ask you a question that your midweek newspaper, it has so many headlines there on the front page itself. I know many newspapers in India do like this as well, but in Canada, we usually have a couple of stories on our front page. The Globe, the Star, the Post media group would usually put a couple of stories. Some Toronto Sun would put maybe one or two. So he was just asking. I said, yeah, this is our strategy because on front page, there's so much to discuss. And especially when he was flipping through the pages, I showed him, I said, look at this. The biggest cricket league at the global level, $1 billion cricket league, IPL. There's not much of the coverage in the mainstream. And he said, yeah, you're covering cricket. And interestingly, this week's our front page cover story was on the news, the fifth state investigative report by CBC, which highlighted cricket. Almost every reporter, every journalist, or I actually even met many senior members in different media outlets as well, from Bell Media to Wall Street Journal to Globe and Mail, many of them. The interesting part was CBC has done a story, and most of the mainstream media colleagues, they knew about this, but I said, I didn't see much of a coverage anywhere. And this is not a story which is related to Indian cricket, because the story by CBC is that the Canadian team who went over there participated in the World Cup. This is Canadian cricket team, and there have been very serious allegations of spot fixing, allegations of corruption in Canada. These are our Canadian forces, Canadian law enforcement agencies who have been investigating this. This is CBC, taxpayers funded media outlet who has led this investigation, but not much of a media coverage. And I did talk to Steve, who was the lead investigator. I did have a one-on-one interview with him at Channel Y. So most of our media colleagues in the mainstream, they were quite amazed to see the in-depth coverage that we could do on issues like this. Of course, they saw we cover a lot of politics, and that's exactly what I'm here doing at the Parliament Hill today. But and then the other aspect I discussed, that yes, there is a discussion of US-Canada relationship in the mainstream media. This was mostly the discussion in Toronto, and some discussion here in Ottawa as well. I said, most of you, when you cover geopolitics, it's mainly from the Canadian prism. As much as it's great, we do cover geopolitics. We do have Ymedia Foreign Policy Report. We talk about Canada-US relationship. We talk about Canada-China, Canada's relationship with Europe, Canada's relationship with India, Australia. We do that. But there's lots happening even otherwise as well. So there's very minimal coverage. The fastest growing economies are China, India today. You look at the report which IMF has just given. So there's not much of a coverage other than the business sections. Of course, Globe, Post has its financial post, and then Wall Street Journal, there's lots of business coverage as well. And I did meet a lot of journalists who were covering just the business side of the affairs for Globe, for Reuters. I met a journalist from Reuters, for Wall Street Journal. So yes, I had lengthy discussions with all of them. I said, yeah, but generally speaking, not much is covered on these affairs. And I think having a background in India, in Asia, where these major economies, if you look at the top 5 economies, you'll see Japan, China, India. These are the major economies in Asia now, and India and China are growing at a very rapid pace. So there's not much of a coverage from their perspective, and we had these discussions whether they would agree or not. So these were very interesting discussions that we had. Other than this, I think as far as the Canadian politics is concerned, we have our segment Ymedia Political Sensex. I did discuss what are your thoughts on Carney. Some of the journalists, they were honest about it. They said, we mainly report and we don't share our opinions that much. But there were others who very candidly shared their opinions. And if I would, before you ask any further questions, feel free to do that. I'll just present the crux. Number one, the underlying thing is many of them very openly, candidly, they were objecting to how President Trump is carrying forward the relationship with Canada. That was the number one thing. The other thing was, yes, Mark Carney, he's trying to steer Canada towards the right direction, but the proof is in the pudding. Let's see how it goes. And for Peter Poilievre, things could get very difficult from here on. Please.
Yes, that's great to hear. At a time where we know that media mainstream is, having cuts and shrinking and budget restraints, and of course, things moving on to social media platforms, it's very critical that, you get this feedback from them because why media is growing. And yet, it doesn't have the same funding as like what CBC and the rest of them in terms of budget wise. Running this whole media company, what do you think? How do you attribute to the growth of Ymedia and what they're struggling with? And of course, also being able to cover these specific stories and having that to be the priority and, the objective as a group editor.
Great question, Ramonaji, as always. I think the mainstream media, with due respect, they are trying to look areas where growth could come from. But if you're looking where the growth would come from, first things first, the younger audience from, I would say, 16 to mid-30s, they're mainly shifting towards digital platforms. So not many of them would really pick up print edition. So I doubt there are much readers left in the age group of 16 to 35 who would really read these print editions, whether it's Globe, Toronto Star. And precisely that's the reason. The newsrooms are shrinking. That's why we've seen multiple and massive layoffs in mainstream print media. Talking about the TV media, they're facing similar challenges as well. Bell Media laid off around 700 people in the last few years. They are even asking for more funding. They're saying, Bell Media is clearly saying this, just for viewers' benefit, I'd like to tell you, Bell Media owns CTV and they also own CP24 as well. But they're saying it's very difficult to cover local news. You have CTV Saskatchewan, you have, I'm here in Ottawa, so when I tune in at my hotel, it was CTV Ottawa. So it's very difficult to cover local news. It consumes a lot of resources, not just money, but there's so many other resources it consumes. So despite the government funding, major media outlets are facing massive challenges. At Ymedia, I would say precisely one of the reasons that we're still doing fine is that we have multiple media platforms. We're not just reliant on print. Like today, I'm doing this interview. So this interview, this discussion with you, Ramonaji, we are broadcasting it live from Ottawa. It's going on our TV platforms. I think the audio feed is going live right now on the radio, FM 105.9. And the same news will go on print as well. So when we are deploying our resources here in Ottawa, so we are using it in print, TV, radio, and digital platforms. I know many of the mainstream outlets have started doing that as well. They're pooling their resources, they're sharing their resources. Many of the mainstream media outlets are doing that. But now where does growth come from? Where does growth? Which country has the fastest immigration? Which country? Undoubtedly India. But where is the coverage? And with due respect, I'm saying, where's the coverage from the Indian perspective, Canada-India relationship? We discussed, even on CBC, with utmost respect, I'm saying, even on CBC, the story about when we are covering Canadian cricket, it's Canada's cricket team, it's not India's cricket team. Indian cricket team has won the World Cup. They won the World Cup in 2026. They won the Champions Trophy in 25. They won the 26 World Cup. But what about the Canadian youth? I'm talking now about the Canadian youth. Those who are born and brought up here in Canada. Those who are playing for Canada's national team. The story that came out on CBC did discuss about the allegations of corruption. But a young 19-year-old kid, Yuvraj Samra, he scored a magnificent century in this World Cup. Nobody could break his records. The players from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, West Indies, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Nobody could break a record set by a 19-year-old Canadian born and brought up in Brampton. How many mainstream outlets covered this news, or did they do an interview with him? At Y Media, we brought Yuvraj Samra. We did a detailed interview. He was born in Brampton. How he joined cricket. What was the struggles of his parents? How Yuvraj's mother, she had to quit her job just to support Yuvraj Samra. And how was it like playing at an international level, Wankhede Stadium, Mumbai, against New Zealand, and you score a century? So this is the type of content which will resonate. And not just sports. I'm talking about, I already spoke about the geopolitical affairs, which I see missing in mainstream media, and there's sports as well. The Chinese community, they love badminton. You go to Markham in the York region, there's so many people who are playing badminton, but how much of the sport badminton is covered in the mainstream community? Talking about Asian Games, with due respect, I'm saying how many sports editors or how many sports journalists in Canada would know that this year Asian Games are happening? And when you're talking about Asian Games, people are going to watch Asian Games here in Canada, and they would be connected to different sports, because after Olympics, the biggest sporting event in Asia is Asian Games after Olympics. So are we covering those sports for them when it's Asian Games? Are we covering China, a massive sporting power? Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Taiwan. Taiwan in itself is a huge power. India, they would try to dominate Asian Games. What is Pakistan doing at the Asian Games? What is Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE? So many countries. What are they going to do at Asian Games? There is absolutely, the coverage is next to nothing. So this sort of coverage, if that is brought in the mainstream media. I'll give you another aspect of this. How much of the business discussion that happens generally? Of course, people would read the business sections and they would get some sort of information, what's happening in China. Fine. But other than that, you go to India, you see BYD there. You see, so many cars from China, so many electronics from China. So, but here in Canada, I, with due respect, again, I'm saying I doubt there is that much of a coverage, whether at the geopolitical level, whether in business or so many other areas. That is my question.
Yeah, and it's so critical because it's through media that gives people the perspective and access to news and current affairs and what's happening around the world, whether it's in sports, entertainment, and everything else beyond. We rely on media to connect us to those events, to those stories, shy of not being there, right? We can sit at home and be able to watch all of that. So it's so critical to be able to have those things as a piece to really connect community to content.
Yeah. And one more quick thing that I want to add, I'll take your example as well. I mean, look at you. You were born in Iran. You live most of your part of your life here in Canada. You've lived in US. You've lived in Europe, especially. You know a lot about England. You've worked there as well. And when it comes to discussing geopolitical affairs or foreign policy, we have your expertise right here at Y Media. You can talk about Iran. As a child, you grew up there. You can talk about Canada. You've been involved in politics at the municipal and federal level as well. And you know a lot about US as well. You've stayed there. You've traveled across US. You've been there in Europe. You've worked in US, in UK. So with due respect, again, I'm saying when we're talking all these things, I think look at the panel members in the mainstream media. They should have more people like you who have lived there, who know. Like you cannot talk about India if you haven't lived there. I know so many things when I listen in the mainstream media, since they haven't lived in India. Like one of the journalists, he asked me, I mean, you're your media, does it cater to the Sikh community or the Hindu community? I said, I don't think so. There is any media in India who would cater to a Sikh community or a Hindu community. There's no such thing like that, catering to a Hindu community or a Sikh community. No, nothing like that. So I think that yes, at Y Media, we we are reporting from ground zero. I've lived in Brampton, I've lived in GTA, and I try to attend as many events as I can. And I tried, like today, I'm reporting from ground zero. And as I just told you, I'm trying to meet lots of journalists, a lot of people, trying to understand their perspective. Please.
Yeah, it's great that you're there. So now that you're on Parliament Hill, tell us, what are your thoughts on Prime Minister Mark Carney? He has now his majority government. He's got a big, huge task ahead of him to make sure that Canada is back on track when it comes to its economy, growth, jobs, affordability. There's so much this Prime Minister needs to do. And essentially, he was elected as the person who's best able to navigate these tough waters when it comes to the economy because he's a banker. So tell us, what are your thoughts on the Prime Minister?
Yeah, I'll share my thoughts and these are my opinions. I'm not reporting anymore. The reporting aspect I already shared. What are the concerns of different journalists? As far as my opinion is concerned, I think you're right. His resume as the governor for Bank of Canada, as governor for Bank of England, working with Goldman Sachs, and at Brookfield Asset. So his resume spoke for him, and many people bought into this idea that yes, Mark Carney is the person who can steer us through these challenging times. And at this time, Mark Carney, I mean, it's not just the word rupture that he used in Davos Summit, but also he's clearly mentioning that yes, our relationship that we had with US is over. He's moving on, and Prime Minister Mark Carney is not mincing his words. Fine, great. We've heard him, the ambitions that he has as a Canadian Prime Minister. We want to diversify our trade relationship. Great. All these things look great. Build great infrastructure, affordability. Great. But then I think he has enough on his plate right now. It'll take him, if not decades, at least 4 to 6 years, even before we start feeling that something has changed. For a common Canadian, I'm looking people walking here right across the Parliament Hill. There are a few people behind me taking pictures of the Parliament. And when I came and entered Parliament Hill here in Ottawa, and I've been here for a few days. So when I look at all these people, whether we are in Toronto, whether we are here in Ottawa, same questions. Affordability, infrastructure, the LRT, or anything, same discussions that were happening in Toronto, the same discussions here. Infrastructure, affordability, housing, economy, jobs, our relationship with US, of course, we would care less if everything is fine. These are pocketbook issues. So I think affordability, we haven't solved that issue, our Prime Minister. Infrastructure, are we really going to build on those massive projects? The proof will be in the pudding. Regarding housing, as much as there have been certain debates, but still, I just read a report out of the 13 major cities in Canada, just before the report came out. 10 cities, still massive affordability problem. So unless these issues are solved, and we're not even talking about other issues where the provincial and the municipal governments also have an important role to play, like healthcare, education, crime. But then they pass on the buck to the federal government that healthcare, we're not getting enough funding. Okay. Crime. Oh, it's the federal government. They have to make stronger laws for us. How can our municipal government or our local law enforcement agencies enforce? Extortion has become a massive, massive issue. And because of, so many extortion threats, so many, there's a latest report by FinTrack. Around 300 people are involved in this extortion business. There are thousands of dollars, being given to these organizations, and they're saying there could be some copycats as well. Of course, there are some organizations that are running all this racket from India. So I think Mark Carney has a lot on his plate. He has to really deliver. So maybe in 6 months, 1 year, and now since he has a majority, so I hope that he does that.
Yeah, already a quarter of his term is finished, right? He's already finished 1 year. So that's definitely important. How much time he has left to do more. But previous to that, he was supported by the Greens, the NDP. So really, can we say that just because he didn't have a majority government, he couldn't move on affordability, knowing that all MPs in the House of Commons, regardless of what party they're in, care about affordability? So that's one big question on him of, you already finished a quarter of your term, what's there to do now?
I've been covering Canadian politics for good 2.5 decades now, and I would come to Parliament Hill more often earlier. In the early part of my career, in 2003, 4, 6, 8, 2010, 2012, 2014, and most of the time I've seen minority governments over here. The first time I came here at Parliament, it was Paul Martin was the Prime Minister at that time. So he ran a minority government. Stephen Harper, 2006, that was a minority government. 2008, again a minority government. The only majority government that they enjoyed was at 2011, and then one majority government we saw for the Liberals, that was 2015. So 2019, 2021, all minority governments. So running a minority government, I doubt you can offer that an excuse. Very rarely you would have a majority government. And this time as well. I mean, yeah, I don't want to discuss that right now. Maybe we can discuss that later on. There's another discussion that has been, talked a lot about that whether Mark Carney, Canadians, should you get a majority through ballot or through floor crossing? Of course, as I just told you, I've seen many floor crossing, both during the Harper time, during Paul Martin's time, during Trudeau's time. So we've seen floor crossing. Nothing new about floor crossing. But then the Conservatives are saying these are dirty backroom deals. So to answer your question specifically, I don't think so. Minority government or a majority government. Of course, you have a stronger mandate, and the moment Mark Carney clearly walked over this majority mark, there was a lot of discussion. What is he going to do now? Fine. I mean, that's one piece of the puzzle solved. But the bigger puzzle is, how do you solve these issues of affordability, crime, housing, infrastructure, foreign policy? How do you solve these issues? That's the big question.
Absolutely. And when it comes to the official opposition leader, Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, what are your thoughts on him?
I think he will face some challenging times, but I'm not at the liberty to name those, the Conservative insiders that we spoke to at Ymedia. My colleague Shubi, he also met a few individuals, and we've gathered a lot of information here at Parliament Hill about that as well. But I think obviously that would be their claim. They're saying Pierre Poilievre still enjoys a lot of support. Our counter questions to them was, if he had that sort of support, we see floor crossings, but unprecedented to see total five floor crossings. Of course, majority of them were from the Conservative Party. So why would they cross the floor? And then Pierre Poilievre, last elections, it was the Conservatives who lost that. It's not the Liberals who won it. The numbers clearly indicated a great lead. When you blow up that kind of lead, it was a Conservative loss, not a Liberal win. So I said, of course, there would be questions about Pierre Poilievre's leadership. And now, are you going to just keep warming the opposition benches for the next 3 years, or will we see a leadership review or a change? They said, no, you just saw the leadership review happen. I said, yeah, we thought the question was settled for at least a couple of years more. And I've heard Pierre Poilievre saying this, that yes, we want. But the question is, from my perspective, if you strictly asked my opinion, and I've been telling this to the Conservative insiders, or anybody, even the MPs. I didn't talk to him, but I met Timopol as well yesterday, but we didn't talk on this issue. Uh, but I've always told them, I said, you have to offer something different, something with substance. What is it? What is it that you're offering any different than what Pierre Poilievre or the Liberals are offering? You were about to make government just because you were banking on the failures of the previous government. You were targeting Trudeau on carbon tax, on so many other issues. Fine, great. That's why your numbers went up. But suddenly here comes Mark Carney, and he says, and he distanced himself from Trudeau, and he says, I'm not Justin Trudeau. Of course, 90% of the cabinet is still the same. But then, he said, this is how my resume looks like. This is how I'm going to deal with US. This is how I'm going to build Canada, the infrastructure, the middle power. And people said, okay, fine, let's give it a try. But what is anything different that you are offering? You tell me. And I have interviewed Pierre Poilievre so many times. And whenever I ask him about the foreign policy, US, China, and India, I would always ask him about US, China, and India. What do you have to say about US, China, and India? With due respect, I'm saying I didn't get anything which was very different from the status quo. No, I didn't get anything. Okay, fine. Immigration. Maybe they were scared. Maybe Pierre Poilievre didn't want to show himself as anti-immigrant or something like that. So he wouldn't offer me much on immigration as well. Look at Mark Carney. Cuts in immigration in all different departments, whether it's the parents and grandparents immigration, whether it's the student immigration, whether PR, and anything. They're cutting on immigration very openly. So I think if Pierre Poilievre or the Conservatives really want to come back to power, there are only two ways. Either one, they can keep relying how Liberals would commit any sort of mistakes and then they would come to power. The other way is very clear, and I think that's the route they should be taking. That is, announce some bold moves, plan something, come out with a better and bold plan for Canada.
Very absolutely great points. And what is now the critical aspect which is on Prime Minister Mark Carney's shoulders, is this Canada-US relations. We know the Kuzma review is up on July 1st. So this is just around the corner. We know that the Prime Minister's put a panel together, bringing in some Conservative previous leader, Erin O'Toole, Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt, some other key official people who were premiers in Nunavut, Quebec. So tell us what is going on and what your thoughts are on the Canada-US relations that is on top of mind.
I think the Americans, they definitely want some sort of concessions, whether you've listened recently to their Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, or you listen to anybody else as well, Scott Bessent. I know the President Trump, he hasn't used some very good words for our Canadian leaders, but he says, I don't have the time right now, so he's busy. And President Trump, I link it with Canada. He's had some tough time in selling that, yes, US has won the war against Iran. Most of the Americans say, if you've decimated Iran's infrastructure, yes or no, how does that benefit Americans? And so many other things which we'll talk later. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that with all this, President Trump is looking for a win. He's definitely looking for a win. That's why there are a lot of discussions going on with India, because once the dust settles down, it'll be about jobs, economy, the oil prices, affordability, housing, very similar issues what we have here in Canada. And there are many people who are talking about Bernie Sanders, and whenever I would listen to him, of course, we will, say, oh, he's far left or this, whatever we can say. But at the end of the day, one point that he would mention, which we all know, the inequalities on the rise in India, inequalities on the rise in China, in Canada as well. We have huge pockets of people who are struggling very hard in GTA. Here in Ottawa also, I'm listening similar stories. But inequality, that has been on the rise for many years in the US as well. That is precisely the reason that, yes, now there are people who would elect leaders like Trump. I don't think so. President Trump is an aberration. If his critics would say, of course he's going to go away in the next 2-3 years, that's fine. Then America will be on a different trajectory. I doubt so. Before President Trump, was U.S. on the right trajectory? And I've said this many times on record. I spoke with I think 2018 or 19, around that time, with our Premier Ford. He came to our studio. I said, America is on the decline. And this is a turning moment. Of course, you didn't win much in Afghanistan. U.S. didn't win much in Afghanistan. U.S. didn't win much in Iraq either. But at that time, at least you had, like in Iraq war, Canada didn't go, but you still had Britain. So Tony Blair was with you all this time. You had the media with you. But now, Britain, Keir Starmer is clearly saying, this is not our war. When you ask Canada, they're saying, oh, we were never told, we were never asked, this is not our war. So you don't have your European allies with you, you don't have Canada with you, you don't have Australia with you. India is just sitting on the sidelines. China, Russia, they're looking and they're watching their own interests here. So US, I think this is the turning point. US hasn't won a war in this quarter of a century. I mean, 1991, yes, of course, the ton of events that happened in USSR. After that, you enjoyed the status of a sole superpower. But that was last century. The story of this century is, if you ask me, the number one story is the rise of China. The number two can be the rise of India. So I just want to say this. I'm a little wary when President Trump, he says he takes his eyes off Iran, is looking for a win. Will it be Greenland? Will it be an attack on Cuba? Or some sort of attack, whether it's economic attack, tariff, some sort of thing on Canada. So that is my concern regarding Canada and US relationship. And our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, I'm not saying this is the right approach or the wrong approach, but the way he's approaching Canada-US relationship, he's not mincing his words. He's saying it's over. And you saw, even on Ymedia social platforms or on our channel, I was watching it on repeat. Do you know what are the irritants? Tariffs on auto, tariffs on steel, 50%. These are the irritants. So actually, he very rarely loses his cool. He has a good temperament. Of course, he runs. I'm seeing a lot of people running here across the Parliament Hill. They're giving high five to each other. I like that. And I look at that in the background. And our Prime Minister Mark Carney, he's very cool. Shubhi was there with him. He loves to run. So does his wife. But he was a bit agitated. When you're talking about Trump, they are not going to dictate the agenda. Every single day, he's making the headlines. And when I came to our hotel right across the street here, I picked up the newspaper, and the Hill Times reported our Foreign Minister Anita Anand. She's going to discuss with her envoys to different countries the new foreign policy. So Canada, our foreign policy is changing. And if you ask me, our relationship with India wasn't bad, other than a brief period when Prime Minister Trudeau announced serious allegations against India. China, it's not too good right now, but it has been okay. But our relationship with US, I think if you would ask anybody who covers geopolitics, they could easily point out the biggest change that Canada is making at the geopolitical level. It's our relationship with the US. So it's not just a rupture. I think, at the people-to-people level, of course, Canadians would still strongly believe that, yes, Americans are our elder brothers. Americans still would most of them, I would say, they don't have anything against Canadians. But this is the 14th month consecutively that Canadians are traveling to US. The numbers are on a massive decline, and travel to other countries is on the rise. Look at the crackdown. They're saying, million. Yeah.
Sorry, we have Honorable Ruby Sahota joining us momentarily. We're going to do a quick interview with her. If you're around, we'd love to come back and continue this conversation.
Sure, you go ahead with the interview with Minister Ruby Sahota. And thanks for your time. And I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, Ramana. Thank you.
Thank you.